What if the dead were more alive than we are? What if everything you believe about death is wrong? What if the end is not the silence of the grave, but the beginning of a greater, stranger journey? The ancient Egyptians didn't fear death. They studied it. They prepared for it. They built monuments, wrote sacred texts, and aligned temples with the stars. Not to honor the living, but to guide the dead. To them, death wasn't the enemy. It was the doorway, the test, the transformation. And life? Life was simply the preparation for that journey. This video is not just history. It is a meditation. It is a question whispered across 5,000 years. What if they were right? To the ancient Egyptians, life was not the destination. It was the training ground, a rehearsal, a fleeting test in a much longer story. Their civilization, which flourished for over 3,000 years, didn't merely tolerate death. It centered itself around it. Death was the obsession, the puzzle, the promise. And in that obsession, the Egyptians found meaning, not just for the end of life, but for how to live it. But why? Why did a people of golden temples, star-mapped pyramids, and rich Nile harvests pour such immense effort into death? Because to them, this world was not the real one, not fully. It was the threshold. The Egyptians believed that we are more than our bodies, that what animates us, what they called the ka, the ba, and the ak, existed beyond flesh and bone. And this soul complex would continue on if properly prepared. So, life had a singular purpose: to get the soul ready. In the Egyptian view, the human soul was not a single thing. It was a trinity. The ka was your life force, what made you alive. It was born with you and needed nourishment, offerings, and spiritual integrity to thrive beyond death. The ba was your personality, your uniqueness. It was the part that traveled between worlds. It could leave the tomb, visit loved ones, and return to the underworld. The ak was your transfigured self, the radiant soul united with the stars, the gods, and eternity. Achieved only if you pass the trials of death. To prepare these parts for their post-mortem journey, you had to live rightly. You had to act in accordance with Ma'at, the principle of truth, balance, harmony, and justice. A life out of balance would lead to a soul lost in the duat, the shadowy world of the dead. Or worse, the annihilation of the soul. In a world where eternal consciousness was the goal, the stakes couldn't be higher. Everyday immortality. How ordinary life became sacred. Unlike many spiritual traditions that reserved the afterlife for kings, priests, or warriors, Egypt democratized eternity. Yes, the pharaohs had golden sarcophagi, but farmers also had spells painted on coffins. Merchants carried amulets for protection. Families buried their dead with tokens and texts. The afterlife wasn't just for the elite. It was for anyone who prepared. This meant that the choices you made in daily life were infused with spiritual weight. Helping a stranger, honoring your parents, telling the truth. Even simple rituals, burning incense, speaking prayers, leaving food for ancestors, were steps toward your final test. And that test was always coming. The Egyptians didn't see this as morbid. They saw it as beautiful. Death gave life meaning. Every action mattered because every action echoed into the next world. One of the most curious aspects of Egyptian belief is the fluid boundary between the living and the dead. The dead were not gone. They were transformed. Tombs were not graves. They were homes, designed to sustain the soul. Offerings weren't just symbolic. They were nourishment. Names spoken aloud had power to sustain the deceased. To forget a name was to kill a soul. So the Egyptians didn't just remember their dead, they sustained them. In turn, the dead could protect the living, offer wisdom in dreams, or act as intermediaries to the gods. The veil between worlds was thin, and the more you honored that truth, the stronger the connection became. This is why they painted scenes of family life, feasting, and music inside tombs. It was not nostalgic, it was literal. They believed those who passed on would continue their best moments forever. Isn't it curious how modern minds speak of legacy while fearing death, and how the Egyptians embraced death as legacy made eternal? If one figure embodies the Egyptian vision of death, it is Osiris, the god who was killed, dismembered, resurrected, and crowned king of the underworld. Osiris's myth is a cosmic mirror of human fate. He was betrayed by his brother Set, cut into pieces, and scattered across Egypt. His wife, Isis, gathered the parts, resurrected him through magic, and bore a son, Horus, who would avenge him. This myth wasn't just a story, it was a promise. Each Egyptian believed they could become an Osiris, that death was not disintegration, but transformation. In burial rites, the deceased was called the Osiris of, and then their name. Mummification mimicked the myth, preserving the body so the soul could find its way. Spells invoked Isis and Anubis. Coffin texts prayed for reunification. Osiris turned death from a dead end into a doorway. A god who had died and returned gave hope to all mortals. Even today, the idea of resurrection lingers in our religious stories, near-death accounts, and symbolic language. Could this ancient myth be a seed still growing in our collective memory? Pause for a moment. What if life truly is a preparation? What if what you do right now echoes into a realm you've forgotten? Do you live as if your soul is being shaped for something beyond this? Do you act as though every decision is a brushstroke on a painting that only eternity will reveal? The Egyptians did. They lived with death in their hearts, not as dread, but as devotion. Their gods were not grim reapers, but cosmic judges and loving guides. Their art wasn't about endings. It was about continuance, and they built for the future, not just for generations, but for eternity. Maybe it's time to ask, have we become too focused on now? Have we forgotten how to die? Or worse, have we forgotten how to live in the presence of death? Imagine this. You stand in a vast chamber, more real than anything you've ever seen. Silent, eternal. The walls are covered in golden glyphs, glowing softly with an otherworldly light. Before you, the scales of judgment. One side holds your heart, the other, a single feather. This is the Hall of Ma'at. This is the moment the Egyptians believed every soul would face. You are not alone. 42 divine judges surround you, watching. Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, guides you. Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe of wisdom, records the truth. And looming nearby, the devourer Amit, part lion, part hippo, part crocodile, waits to consume the unworthy. This is not metaphor. This was the Egyptian reality of death. What was the judgment scene? At the heart of Egyptian belief was Ma'at, the principle of truth, justice, and cosmic order. To live well was to live in accordance with Ma'at, and to enter the afterlife, one had to prove they had done so. The judgment of the dead, as depicted in the Book of the Dead, was a ritualistic trial in the afterlife. The heart, considered the seat of thought, emotion, and morality, was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If the heart was lighter or equal in weight, the soul was pure. If heavier, burdened by lies, cruelty, or injustice, it was devoured, ending the soul's existence. No second chances. This was not about punishment. It was about harmony. The gods were not cruel. They were guardians of balance. A soul that disrupted that balance could not move on. But what made a heart light? What made it heavy? To pass this judgment, the deceased would recite the 42 negative confessions, each addressed to a different judge. These were not laws. They were declarations, affirmations of a life lived justly. I have not stolen. I have not murdered. I have not caused pain. I have not closed my ears to truth. I have not polluted the earth. These confessions span ethics, environmentalism, justice, and spiritual purity. They reflect a deep and nuanced understanding of human responsibility. Imagine if every action you take today will be spoken in your defense tomorrow. Would you still say those harsh words? Would you still take more than you give? The Egyptians believed that the heart remembers. You couldn't lie. You couldn't pretend. Your soul, exposed, would speak for you. Strangely, the idea of a judgment after death is not unique to Egypt. Many modern near-death experiences describe a life review, a panoramic playback of every moment, seen not only from their eyes, but from the perspective of those they affected. They feel what others felt. They witness the ripple effects of their choices. Is this not the weighing of the heart? Science can't fully explain these experiences, but their consistency across cultures, ages, and belief systems is hauntingly familiar. Could it be that the Egyptians weren't imagining a spiritual trial, but remembering it? Every element of the judgment scene held meaning. Anubis, guardian of the dead, didn't judge. He guided. He brought the soul to the scales and ensured the ritual was just. Thoth, the divine scribe, did not speak. He recorded. Pure observation. Truth unfiltered. Amit, the devourer, did not chase or hunt. She waited, not as punishment but as a cosmic filter. That which could not harmonize was returned to the void. This ritual wasn't a courtroom. It was a mirror. A cosmic truth machine. And you were the defendant, the witness, and the evidence. Here, the Egyptians challenge us. What does it mean to live a life worthy of eternity? Not wealthy, not powerful, but balanced, true. They believed character was everything. Even the pharaoh, despite being divine, would be judged. No one was exempt. No title, no offering, no prayer could outweigh a corrupted heart. Is it possible that we, in our modern world of ambition and distraction, have forgotten this? That we live for comfort instead of truth, for gain instead of harmony? What would your heart weigh? Egyptians didn't leave this moment to chance. They rehearsed it in life. They memorized the negative confessions. They lived ritually, eating, sleeping, loving, and grieving in rhythm with the divine. They sought Ma'at daily, in action, thought, and intention. Death was not feared because it was not a surprise. It was a return to what they had prepared for their whole lives. Let's shift perspectives. What if this trial isn't just an afterlife event? What if it's happening all the time, within you? What if every day your soul weighs itself? What if your heart feels the burden of your choices, whether you admit them or not? Could guilt, shame, anxiety be modern echoes of ancient imbalance? And could inner peace, the feeling of being whole, be the soul's way of telling you you're aligned with Ma'at? We chase therapy, medication, and distraction, trying to silence the internal chaos. But maybe, just maybe, the Egyptians would tell us to seek harmony first, balance truthfully, love deeply, speak honestly, act justly, and perhaps the weight will lift. Imagine you're standing at the edge of an unknown realm. You've passed the judgment. Your heart was light, your life in harmony. But what lies ahead is stranger than anything you've known. The landscape is dreamlike, dark waters, mountains of fire, lakes of lilies, and gates guarded by beings with lion heads and serpentine eyes. The journey to the afterlife is not a simple path. It's a labyrinth of tests, illusions, and guardians. How do you navigate this realm of the dead? For the Egyptians, the answer was simple. You don't go alone. You take a guide. And that guide was a book. A book not of death, but of life beyond it. The so-called Book of the Dead was not a book in the traditional sense. It was a collection of spells, hymns, instructions, and prayers, personalized for the deceased, written on papyrus, tomb walls, or even linen wrappings. Its true name was the Book of Coming Forth by Day, because that's what the dead did. They didn't vanish. They emerged. This book was a spiritual map, a traveller's guide through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, a manual for navigating the perils, puzzles, and divine checkpoints that lay between death and eternity. And every line, every symbol, every incantation had a purpose: to protect, empower, and transform the soul. The Duat wasn't a place of torment like the Christian hell. It was a realm of trials, a proving ground. It was ever shifting, both physical and symbolic. You might find yourself sailing on a solar boat through celestial rivers one moment, and walking through deserts of fire the next. There were gates, 12 of them, each associated with a different hour of night. There were guardians with riddles. There were demons to outwit. But this wasn't punishment. It was purification. The soul, though judged, had not yet reached paradise. It had to be refined, awakened, prepared. The Book of the Dead offered spells for each stage, spells to open gates, spells to transform into animals, a falcon, a lotus, a heron, spells to avoid decapitation, drowning, or being devoured, spells to remember one's name, because to forget your name was to die a second time. These weren't just magical defenses, they were psychological, symbolic, alchemical. Each spell was a test of awareness. To the Egyptians, words were magic. To speak a name was to give it life. To utter a spell was to command reality. This belief is embedded deeply in the Book of the Dead. But this wasn't mindless incantation. The soul had to know the words, not just recite them. To speak truly, with intention, with memory. The dead needed to remember who they were, what they believed, and where they were going. Otherwise, the journey would consume them. In this way, the Book of the Dead was like a mirror, not just a guide, but a reminder, a whisper from the living world. You are not lost. You are on the path. Remember. And maybe, just maybe, our own modern lives are missing this memory, a map that reminds us who we are when everything else falls away. One of the most well-known spells in the Book of the Dead is spell 125, the very ritual of judgment we explored in chapter 2. But this spell is not just about passing a test, it's about identity. The recitation of the 42 negative confessions isn't just about telling the gods who you were, it's about reminding yourself. You speak your purity into existence. This is not about guilt. It's about alignment. It's about reaching a state where your inner and outer worlds reflect one another. And isn't that what we long for, even now? To be whole, to be known, to be remembered. The Book of the Dead doesn't just show the journey, it shows what kind of soul can survive it. The final goal of the Egyptian afterlife was not to float in some idle paradise. It was to become an Ak, a radiant, transfigured soul. To become an Ak meant you were purified. You had passed through the Duat. You had merged with the divine order. You could live forever in the field of reeds, a mirror of earthly life, but perfected. You could commune with the gods. You could visit the living, appear in dreams, or become a star in the night sky. But more than that, you became effective. The word Ak implies potency, capability. You were not passive, you were powerful. This is a far cry from many modern visions of the afterlife. The Egyptians didn't want rest, they wanted transformation. Remarkably, the Egyptian Book of the Dead is not alone in world history. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, or Bardo Thodol, also guides the soul through stages after death. It too includes prayers, visualizations, and rituals to assist the dying. Christian mystics speak of purgatory and the soul's purification. Shamanic traditions involve journeying through the spirit world. Even some modern psychedelic studies, like those involving DMT, describe realms, beings, and challenges eerily similar to Egyptian accounts. Could it be that the journey through death is a universal path, remembered differently across time and space? Could it be that we've all been trying to map the same landscape with different symbols? Let's pause and ask a dangerous question. What if you are already in the Duat? What if this life, with its trials, illusions, fears, and choices, is itself a passage? A test of memory, awareness, and transformation? What if the Book of the Dead wasn't written just for the dead? What if it's for you? What gates are you facing? What spells have you forgotten? What truths do you need to speak to survive? The journey isn't just about what comes after life. It's about how to live in a way that prepares you for anything, because you've remembered who you are. We are used to thinking of tombs as places of silence, of dust, of endings. But to the Egyptians, a tomb was the most important beginning of all. Tombs were not made to hide the dead. They were built to awaken the soul, to preserve identity, to ignite transformation. The stone walls, the vivid paintings, the sacred texts and amulets all served one purpose: to turn a person into something more, something eternal. Let us walk among these ancient spaces, not as archaeologists, but as seekers. Because the way the Egyptians built for death reveals how they understood life. Step into the tomb of a high official, or a worker in Deir el-Medina, or even a pharaoh like Seti I or Ramesses VI. You won't find sorrow, you'll find stars, stories, songs carved in stone. Every inch is deliberate. Paintings of the journey through the Duat hymns, to Ra and Osiris, scenes of feasting, farming, and music. These aren't decorations, they are technologies of transcendence. To see one's life recorded in paint and hieroglyph was to anchor the soul. The tomb became a map, a spell, a prayer. Even the physical layout of tombs mimicked the journey of the sun, descending from the world of light through darkness into rebirth. The tomb was a womb of stone. And what of the pyramids? Not mere monuments, not tombs in the modern sense, but resurrection machines. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned with astonishing precision to the cardinal directions. Its shafts point to stars sacred to the Egyptian cosmos, Orion's belt associated with Osiris, and Sirius linked to Isis. This wasn't architecture for the dead. It was a star map for the soul. To enter the pyramid was to ascend, to become Osiris, to merge with the sky. Its massive structure, layer upon layer of limestone, sealed chambers, hidden passages, wasn't just to protect the body. It was to energize the transformation. Think of it. 2.3 million blocks, each placed with reverence, not for the ego of kings, but for the eternity of the human spirit. Every object placed in the tomb carried symbolic power. The Ankh, life, eternal and divine. The scarab, rebirth, transformation, the rising sun. The Jed pillar, stability, resurrection, the spine of Osiris. These weren't decorations. They were interfaces, tools to activate the unseen. Even color mattered. Blue for creation and divinity, gold for the flesh of the gods, black for fertility and the rich soil of rebirth. Modern science calls this superstition, but modern minds have also forgotten how to see symbolically. To the Egyptians, art wasn't art, it was language, code. A painting of the deceased receiving bread and beer wasn't nostalgia. It ensured they would be nourished. To be painted was to become. The Egyptians believed in microcosm and macrocosm, that the universe was mirrored in every part of life. So a tomb was not just a place, it was a model of the world. The ceiling, stars and constellations, the floor, earth and the Nile, the walls, realms of gods and spirits. Inside, the soul could orient itself, could remember. Because the greatest danger was not destruction, it was disorientation. To forget who you are, where you are, and why you are here. And maybe, even now, this truth applies. Perhaps the reason so many feel lost is not that they lack direction, but that they lack a map, a sacred space, a cosmology to belong to. The name in Egypt was sacred. It was called the Ren. To erase a name was to kill a soul. To speak a name was to summon presence. Tombs preserved names with obsession. On walls, on statues, on canopic jars. Even curses weren't meant to scare away grave robbers. They were meant to protect the name. What is your name? Not just the sound, but the story, the essence, the memory. In modern life, we use names casually for usernames and ID cards. But the Egyptians remind us, a name is a spell, and in the afterlife, you are what is remembered. Tombs weren't sealed forever. They were visited. Relatives brought offerings. Priests recited rituals. The living played music to comfort the dead. This wasn't ancestor worship, it was communion, a sacred relationship across the veil. Even today, in many cultures, graves are tended, altars are made, candles lit. Could this be an echo, a lingering memory of Egypt's truth, that death is not a wall, it is a curtain, and both sides can reach through? Now pause and think, what are you constructing? Not with stone and gold, but with time, with action, with intention. Is your life a tomb, a prison of habit, a distraction from death? Or is it a temple, a symbol, a path? The Egyptians spent lifetimes preparing for a journey that may or may not come, but in doing so, they lived fully. Because to build for eternity is to remember what matters now. So ask yourself, what is your architecture? What are you aligning with? What names will be spoken after you're gone? And are you building something that could stand for 5,000 years? We've walked through the beliefs, the trials, the guides, and the monuments. But now, the deepest question remains. Have we forgotten something the ancients knew? Something vital not only for dying, but for living. In our final chapter, we step out of the tomb and look into the mirror to ask, Not how to avoid death, but how to meet it. And maybe, how to be reborn. Have we forgotten how to die? The ancients faced death every day, not because they were morbid, not because they longed for it, but because they understood it. To them, death was not the opposite of life. It was its mirror, its test, its reflection. We, the modern, shield ourselves from it. We hide the dying behind hospital curtains, rename death with euphemisms, distract ourselves with entertainment, and chase youth as if time itself were a predator. But what if this avoidance is the very thing that robs us of meaning? The Egyptians embraced death not as an ending, but as the final ritual of becoming, and in doing so, they lived deliberately. We must ask, have we lost that deliberate living? We build skyscrapers, not pyramids. We archive data, not souls. We memorialize moments in digital clouds, but forget the rituals that ground us in eternity. We die unprepared. We fear the silence because we filled our lives with noise. We fear being forgotten because we've forgotten how to remember. But the Egyptians would ask, have you lived in Ma'at? Have you prepared your name? Do you know where your soul is going? They lived with the end in mind, not out of dread, but out of reverence. And maybe that reverence is exactly what we're missing. If you knew you would be judged, not by others, but by your own heart, would you change how you lived? If you believed that your soul continues, would you speak differently to those around you? Would you spend more time creating than consuming, loving than fearing? Death is a strange teacher. It gives no lectures. It simply waits. But the Egyptians heard its silence and translated it into language, art, and myth. They stared into the void and came back with visions of light. Can we? The Duat is no longer charted in temple scrolls, but we still walk through it, in moments of grief, of despair, of awakening. Every ending is a gate, every loss a lesson, every transformation a kind of resurrection. You don't need to believe in Osiris to understand the power of dying to your old self and rising anew. The Egyptians left us a cosmic roadmap, not just for the soul, but for the seeker, for anyone willing to look beyond the veil. So now, as the light fades and this journey draws to a close, we ask not what happens when we die, but what happens when we forget how to die, and in forgetting, lose the ability to truly live. The ancients are whispering still, from their tombs, their texts, their stars. Prepare, live with purpose, die with grace, and remember, this is not the end. It never was. Has modern life caused us to forget how to live? By making us forget how to die? Which part of the Egyptian vision resonates most deeply with you? Would you live differently if you saw this life as preparation? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's open a conversation the ancients started long ago. And if this journey has stirred something within you, give it a like, subscribe for more, and step with us into the mysteries yet to come. Because we're just getting started.